Hello and welcome to part 5 of our Blender Beginner series. In this episode we're going to be looking at the first part of our particle setup, in which we place the trees upon our scene. We're going to look at the settings that we need, and then we're going to go into weight painting, which will tell Blender how to apply the trees to our ground surface. And then we'll go in and, using the particle editing tools, we'll just tidy up the scene and make it look good, and then we'll take a test render and we'll call this session done. But to start with, let's open our scene. Go with this one and go to our 3D view, and we will select the surface that we want to apply our trees to, which is the ground plane. And I'm going to start my screencast display and hide these two windows for the moment by pressing T to get rid of the toolbar and N to get rid of the information panel. And now we go over to our data tabs and click on the little stars, which gives us our particle settings. Now if I press the plus button, we're given a particle system that I can now name, and we'll call it trees. We'll change the settings name to trees as well. You don't have to change that, but if you have multiple particle systems going on, it's a good idea to change the name of the settings. The type, emitter, an emission type actually throws particles out from the faces, and we don't want to do that in this instance. We want the hair. And as you can see, it has placed a load of strands all over our mesh. We don't need to worry about the rest of the checkboxes here. What we need is our emission, and we need that to be quite low, because the more particles you have in the scene, the more chance they have of overlapping, and you get all sorts of weird effects going on. So we'll change that, and for this scene a good number is around 200. Press enter, and immediately you'll notice that the amount of hairs on our mesh has reduced drastically, but they're still scattered all over the cylinder. So we'll just zoom back in a bit there. Okay, hair length of 4 it doesn't really matter, but if I was to change that, you can see how the hair actually grows and shrinks. So we could use that to define how high in our scene that goes. I've forgotten what it was. Reset to default value of 0. That's not a good idea. I think it was 4. Yes. Use Modifier Stack. That tells Blender to use the modifiers that are on the cylinder and apply them to the hairs. I'm going to check that, and that'll use the subsurf modifier to define how the scene looks. Hair dynamics we don't need. That just gives you tools for animating the hair, and as we're using fixed objects in this scene, we don't need to worry about them. We will have a look at them quickly though. So it gives us a stiffness, mass, how much they can bend, whether they bend from the internal, whether they collide with each other, and the damping is just the way they interact with their surroundings. Spring gives them a little bit of bounce, air gives them a little bit of that flowing quality, and steps is how many subdivisions within the hair. Let's play that quickly. It's probably going to be pretty slow, but as you can see, with the hair dynamics on, during animation the hairs are affected by the surroundings and they're kind of floating about, and they've actually fallen upside down actually, but that's how it works. And if I was to move the mesh, they'd be flowing around like hairs. I'll just send that back to the beginning. We'll turn hair dynamics off. And the important part for this tutorial is the render settings. We want the emitter to be checked because we're using the road cylinder to emit the hairs. If we turn that off, this actual whole cylinder wouldn't appear in our final render, which would be annoying. and a bit foolish because our trees and our car would be floating in space. Parent setting, if we have children applied to our hairs, what that does is it applies extra particles for each hair that exists. So if I was to have 10 children for each hair in this scene, that would equate to 200 hairs. 10 children, that's 2,000 hairs in the scene. And having children just allows you to create denser amounts of particles whilst calculating just a small amount, but as we're not using additional hairs and children in this one, we will leave that unchecked. Unborn and died, that just relates to the starting and end times of the particles. It's usually something that you would use in emission particles, not really relevant to hair. Strand render, if you were just simply rendering the strands themselves, you would check that. Object, we could determine a single object, so we could use lamps. Now we have thousands of lamps in place of the hairs. Let's render that. It'll probably kill our computer, but we'll give it a go. And you can see how having thousands of lights in the scene has totally pretty much killed everything. It doesn't even know how to render. It's rendering itself inside out. Let's stop that because it's silly. Go back to 3D view and we'll press this X and uncheck that, and instead of object we will check group. And now if you recall from our modelling tutorial, we actually made a group from our trees and named it trees, and the way we did that was to select both trees by pressing right mouse button, holding down shift, selecting the other tree with the right mouse button and pressing Ctrl G. I'm not going to do it again because I have already created the group, but you press Ctrl G and that groups the two together, and they develop this green border. That's how you know it's a group. You get a green border also when you use rigid bodies, so that's confusing. But under duplicate group in our particle settings, we just select the group that we want to reproduce, and you see that the trees have been added to the mesh, and you'll also notice that they are laying down. And to fix that little problem, we simply press the rotation checkbox under the render settings. Then we go to our trees and we have to physically rotate our trees so they're lying down in order for Blender to tell the particles to rotate. So if we press R and rotate them along the Y axis by pressing Y and then type 90 and left click to confirm, you see our trees are lying down here, but if we go to our main scene, you'll see they're standing up as we wish them to be. Now if we just select our cylinder again and get back to our particle settings, you'll see they're far too tiny to be of any use to the scene. You could leave them like that. It would be not the best obviously, but if we take this size option and start dragging it to the right slightly, we can see our trees are growing. .5 is about right if you want to just type it in. I've overshot that slightly with sliding, but they look okay to me from here. Yep. But now if we look at our scene, you'll see that our trees are all over the mesh. Some of them are inside the other trees. That's a bit of a problem, and we will do what we can to fix that. But now we need to tell Blender to put our trees on the grass and not on the road. And at the moment we don't have enough faces for Blender to discern the best places to put them. So what we'll do is, with our road selected, we'll just pop into edit mode and we'll press Ctrl R and add a loop cut, and use our middle mouse button, just scroll it up once so we get 2 lines. Press left mouse button to confirm, right mouse button to confirm the confirmation, if that makes sense. Now we have extra faces on that side, and we'll do the same on the opposite side. Press Ctrl R, scroll it up one time, press the left mouse button to confirm, and we don't need it adjusting, so we'll just press our right mouse button to lock it into place. Now we have more faces with which to work, and we will now go into weight painting and tell Blender how to assign the trees. So if I simply click the edit mode button, go into select weight paint from the menu, you'll see our scene has turned blue, and that simply means that there is no weight applied to that particular mesh. So what I need to do is press T to bring my toolbar back, and you'll see we have our brushes. We can use these brushes to paint on the mesh. All we need is the draw brush. See, we're assigned a brush weight of 1, so if I paint on the mesh, you'll see that the colour starts to change. If I come out a bit and paint on this side of the mesh, everywhere that it turns red, it's telling Blender that this is the full strength of the mesh, so this is where the most trees must be, and we'll have the most trees along that back edge. And now we've got that whole cylinder section painted. I'm going to reduce the weight on my brush to 0.5 and then paint in this middle section, and it's turning green, so it's telling Blender that it needs trees in this area but of a lesser density. I will also paint green on the opposite side, because these trees are simply for the reflections in the car paint and windows. So if I paint those in, that's good. Now if I reduce my weight again to 0.25, and now I will paint some blue along this inner edge on this side, and again this will tell Blender that it wants trees here where it's been painted, but not so many as the other areas. And that's everything we need for that. If we just take a look here under the mesh data panel, it gives our vertices, and it's automatically created a vertex group when we started painting, but we can rename that to trees, so we know when we come to select that vertex group, it's the group that's going to affect the tree placement of the trees. And now with that done, we can go back to particle mode, and if we come down to vertex group settings, under density we can tell Blender now to use the trees vertex group that we just created, and immediately you see all the trees jump over to the painted areas. We'll just scroll around. We don't want any trees in the blue area in the middle, and we have one, maybe two, but we we have big clusters as well, so we need to adjust those because we've got trees inside trees, and that's going to look a bit awkward when it comes to rendering. So what we'll do is, now from weight paint we will go into our particle editing tools, and down here on our header bar we have this selection of tool options. The first one just allows you to use the tools to affect the whole particle. The second one splits the particle into vertices that you can move independently of each other, which is useful for defining hair strands, but it's not so useful for this particular scene where we're just using objects. So if we select the final one, which just gives us an end point for the hair to select, and we can go through and press X and delete the particles as we need them. So if we select that one, and if we shift select, we take, oops, not that one, if we take that one, and that one, and delete those, we're just breaking up these clusters by holding down shift, pressing select, we're looking for areas of density that are just creating those clusters, deleting the particles, allowing Blender just to break up those big areas that we saw. Give some of the particles a bit of breathing space. We can go in and just take out whole swathes of trees, like a Canadian logging firm. Just tidy it up. This may take a little bit of while. And then we just press X to delete those particles. Take a look. See, we've got some there, so we'll just select those two, delete them, and that should look a lot better. Now there are some quite large swathes of empty area, so what we can do is press the add button and just pop in the occasional random tree, one at a time, just to break up those big empty areas. Again, not too many, otherwise we'll end up with trees everywhere and they'll all be sat inside each other again, which isn't good. But I think that will do, so let's leave particle editing mode, go back to object mode, and as you can see, our trees are nicely randomly spaced. They're not too far into each other where they intersect. If we look at this, if we look over here at these, they're far enough apart just to show up as being next to each other on the render, but not close enough for us to have to worry about them. So if we look through our camera by pressing 0 on the number pad, you can see trees in the background, and if we press F12 to take a render of that, zoom out a little, now you can see our car with the trees planted nicely on the surface. We have trees in the reflections, and that is looking great. If you don't like the way you've done your hair particles in edit mode, you just come over here, press free edit, and that will undo all the deleting and adding that you just did and allow you to start again with that. You'll notice you can't change the emission number anymore. If you needed more hairs, you would have to either add them manually like we were doing in the particle editing, or you can just free edit, change the number. One thing we will do, just to add a bit of variety, is go back to 3D view, and under random we'll just drag that slightly, 1.5, and that just changes the size of the trees randomly, so it's between maximum size and a fraction lower. It'll just help to break it up again. If we were to put it all the way up to 1, you'll see that in more detail. There's trees randomly sized everywhere. It's far too much. 1.5 is about right. And for the tree particle systems, we are done. And I will see you in the next session, where we will look at the emission particles, which we will use to apply a blowing leaf effect across the plane, and I'll show you how to set that up, texture the particles, and also how to create the alpha image that we're going to use in GIMP, as I said previously. But until next time, let's save our file by going into File, and you can either just simply press Save, which will save over the current scene, or you can press Save As. I'm going to Save As. I'm going to rename it tutorial underscore particles underscore part 1. Press enter to confirm that, and then press save as Blender file. Don't forget, pressing enter doesn't actually save. You have to click the button to make sure it saves, and that's that done. And so until next time, subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, and give us a render of what you've got so far. Simply press F12, let that finish, go to image, save as image onto your hard drive, and then you can post that onto our Facebook page or Google+. If you have any comments about the video, please feel free to stick them in the comment section below. We'll try and answer as many as we can if we're not inundated with thousands, which I don't think that's likely, is it? Anyway, until next time, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in part 2 of this Particles series.